The American Civil War, a nation divided, 4 years of fire and blood that reshaped history forever. On the fields of Gettysburg, Shiloh, and countless unnamed places, leaders rose, armies clashed, and a country fought for its soul. In this film, Academy of Shorts uses AI to breathe life into rare photographs, revealing the faces of Union leaders and commanders as you've never seen them before. This is History Reborn. Boston-born, privileged, yet destined for the smoke and fury of America's darkest hour, Robert Gould Shaw could have commanded any regiment, but in 1863, he chose the impossible to lead the 54th Massachusetts, the first all-black Union regiment, into the teeth of prejudice and war. He faced not only Confederate cannons, but the scorn of his own side. And still he marched at Fort Wagner through sand and blood, a banner raised high. Shaw fell that night, cut down beside his men, but in death, he proved a nation's worth was not measured by color, but by courage. His name lives where honor burns brightest, Robert Gould Shaw. June 1863, a midnight telegram shatters the calm. George Gordon Meade, a quiet, sharp-minded engineer, is wrenched from corps command and given the entire Army of the Potomac. Days later, Gettysburg erupts in fire and smoke. Lee's legions surge. Meade holds the high ground, calculating, relentless, until the Confederate tide breaks. A nation exhales. Victory is his, but Washington is unsatisfied. Lincoln chastises him for letting Lee slip away. When Grant arrives, Meade's power fades, his triumph buried in another man's shadow. He won the Union's greatest battle, yet spent the rest of the war fighting for the credit already earned. George Meade, the quiet victor history nearly forgot. David Glasgow Farragut, born of the sea, a midshipman at 9, a lifetime beneath the flag's stars. Dark eyes keen as a hawk's, face weathered by salt and storm, he rose through every rank the Navy could name. By 1864, the Civil War's tides had made him its boldest admiral. At Mobile Bay, mines, not torpedoes they called them, waited like silent death. When his fleet wavered, Farragut climbed the rigging, smoke curling around him, and thundered the words that split the roar of cannon. Damn the torpedoes! Torpedoes, full speed ahead. Through fire and iron, he crushed the last Confederate port in the Gulf, earning the nation's first Admiral's stars. Benjamin Mayberry Prentiss, broad-shouldered, stern-eyed, a soldier cut from the frontier's grit. By April 1862, his command lay at Pittsburgh Landing, where dawn broke with the thunder of Shiloh. Against a storm of Confederate fury, Prentiss anchored the Hornet's Nest, holding line after line as shot and shell tore the earth apart. For hours his men stood, buying time with blood until surrounded at last. Outnumbered, exhausted, he surrendered, 10,000 saved by his defiance. Shiloh's field was crimson, but its outcome turned on Prentiss's stand. A general often forgotten, yet in the smoke of that desperate day, Benjamin Prentiss carved his name into the marrow of history. John Alexander Logan, black hair flowing, eyes fierce with fire, a voice that could rattle the halls of Congress. From Illinois lawyer to fiery politician, he turned from the stump to the sword when the Union called. At Belmont, at Fort Donelson, at Vicksburg, his courage carved him a soldier's name. And at Atlanta, in July 1864, when McPherson fell, It was Logan who rode the lines, rallying broken regiments, his presence alone a banner of defiance. Under his command, the Union Army surged back with iron resolve. After the war, he carried memory into politics, father of Memorial Day, keeper of sacrifice. A man of thunder in battle, of conviction in peace, John A. Logan. George Armstrong Custer, golden-haired, blue-eyed, barely 23, when war hurled him into legend. From the classroom at West Point to the battlefield at Gettysburg, he rose like a spark in dry grass, the Union's youngest general, fearless at the head of charging cavalry. His saber gleamed at Trevilian Station. His brigades thundered at Appomattox, sealing Lee's surrender. Loved by his troopers, doubted by his rivals, he lived at a gallop. Reckless, relentless, always hungry for the fight. The Civil War made his name ring with glory. And though destiny later carried him west to tragedy, it was here, in blue and gold, that Custer burned brightest. Joseph Hooker, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing eyes and a soldier's swagger. They called him Fighting Joe, a name he wore like armor, for no man in blue hungered more for battle. In camp, he inspired loyalty. In the field, he charged with fire, rising from brigade to corps, until in 1863, the Army of the Potomac was his to command. Yet pride is a dangerous comrade. At Chancellorsville, against Lee's audacity, Hooker faltered. His army bled, his glory dimmed, and the name that once roared with promise echoed with doubt. Still, Fighting Joe marched on, his courage unquestioned, his legend scarred. A general remembered not only for the battles he won, but for the one that forever defined him. Ambrose Everett Burnside, broad of frame with heavy whiskers that bore his name into history. A West Pointer, inventive and earnest, he led with courage, but carried a burden of doubt. At Fredericksburg in December's chill, his army charged the stone wall and fell in heaps, an assault as bloody as it was hopeless. Yet Burnside marched on, shouldering command where others would not. In 1864, at Petersburg, he conceived the mine that would blast open the Confederate line. But the assault collapsed into chaos. The crater became a pit of slaughter, his vision lost in fire and ruin. Admired for honor, remembered for disaster, Burnside's name endures, etched not only in his whiskers, but in the hard lessons of war. Winfield Scott Hancock, tall, commanding, with a soldier's bearing and a gaze that brooked no doubt. His men called him Hancock the Superb, for wherever he rode, discipline hardened and courage flared. At Antietam, at Fredericksburg, his lines held fast, but it was Gettysburg that forged his immortality. On the second day, he galloped the ridge, rallying shattered regiments. On the third, he braced his corps against Pickett's charge, shot from his saddle yet refusing to quit the field. Bleeding, unbowed, his calm resolve steadied the Union when the Republic itself seemed ready to crack. A warrior of iron will and unshaken honor, Winfield Scott Hancock, the Superb. Philip Henry Sheridan, short in stature, but fire blazed in his dark eyes and every word he spoke rang with urgency. A cavalryman to the bone, he turned speed and fury into weapons of war. At Stone's River, at Chickamauga, his stubborn valor saved broken lines. But it was in the Shenandoah that his legend thundered. Sheridan, riding hard from Winchester, rallying routed men, his arrival alone transforming defeat into sweeping victory. Wherever his horse's hoofs struck, the Union's will seemed to harden. At Appomattox, his troopers cut off Lee's last escape, driving the war to its end. Fiery, relentless, unstoppable, Philip Sheridan, the storm that broke the Confederacy. George Henry Thomas, broad, deliberate, a Virginian who stood for the Union when his own state turned away. Calm eyes, steady hand, a soldier of unshakable resolve. At Mill Springs, he struck the first great Union victory in the West. At Chickamauga, when others broke, Thomas held the line, hour after hour, his stand earning him the name that would follow him forever, the Rock of Chickamauga. At Nashville, he waited, patient as stone, then unleashed a storm that shattered Hood's army and ended the Confederate threat in the West. No flash, no boast, only strength, loyalty, and iron will. George Henry Thomas, the rock upon which the Union stood. George Brinton McClellan, brilliant engineer, handsome, confident, with a soldier's charm that made his men adore him. He forged the Army of the Potomac from raw recruits into a proud, disciplined force. His soldiers called him Little Mac, and they would follow him anywhere. Yet caution weighed heavy. On the peninsula, at Antietam, he held victory within his grasp, only to let it slip away. His eye for detail built an army, but his fear of risk shackled it. Lincoln, frustrated, removed him, even as his men wept for their commander. Later, he sought the White House, but found only defeat. Admired, doubted, beloved, McClellan's name endures as the general who built an army, but never truly unleashed it. William Tecumseh Sherman, gaunt face, piercing eyes, restless as a storm. He called war what it was, cruelty, fire, destruction, and he wielded it without disguise. In the West, he rose with Grant, striking at Shiloh, at Vicksburg, until his name carried the weight of inevitability. In 1864, he cut a fiery path through Georgia, breaking the Confederacy's heart with relentless force. Atlanta burned, and the march to the sea carved terror into the South's memory. His soldiers called him relentless, his enemies called him ruthless, but Sherman cared only for ending the war. No romance, no illusions, only the hard truth of victory through fire. William Tecumseh Sherman, the storm no wall could hold back. Ulysses S. Grant, quiet eyes, unassuming face, a man who spoke little but struck hard. At West Point, few saw greatness in him. He was a skilled horseman, but hardly a star. No one imagined this quiet cadet would one day command the fate of a nation. He rose from obscurity, a failed farmer and forgotten officer, to lead the Union armies with relentless will. At Fort Donelson, he demanded unconditional surrender. At Shiloh, at Vicksburg, he endured slaughter and siege, grinding ever forward. While others hesitated, Grant advanced. In 1864, Lincoln gave him the reins of the entire war. He locked onto Lee and never let go, through blood and mud to Appomattox Courthouse, where the Confederacy finally bowed. Calm in triumph, steady in storm, Grant was the hammer that broke the rebellion's spine. Edwin McMaster Stanton, stocky, bearded, with sharp eyes that saw everything. A brilliant lawyer, suddenly thrust into the heart of war. As Secretary of War, he brought iron discipline to chaos, organizing armies, forging supply lines, dismissing the weak, driving the Union's war machine with relentless force. Stanton was feared for his temper, respected for his will. He clashed with generals, challenged power, and never hesitated to speak truth, even to Lincoln himself. Yet in the storm of war, he became the Union's backbone, unyielding, precise, tireless. And on the night Lincoln fell, Stanton stood at his side, voice breaking through the stillness. Now he belongs to the ages. Not a soldier, but a force. Edwin Stanton, the iron will behind victory. Abraham Lincoln, tall and gaunt, with eyes that carried both sorrow and resolve. Born in a log cabin on the frontier, shaped by hardship, self-taught and unyielding, he rose not through privilege, but through intellect, humility, and quiet strength. When the nation tore itself apart, Lincoln held its center, calm amid chaos, firm amid doubt. He carried the weight of every letter to a grieving mother, every battlefield death, every tear shed for a divided country. His words at Gettysburg bound a fractured people to a higher purpose, giving meaning to sacrifice and hope to despair. As victory drew near, fate struck in the night, silencing the man who had bound the Union back together. He was not merely a president, he was the conscience of a nation, and his legacy still echoes in its heartbeat. These were the faces of a nation at war. Soldiers, strategists, visionaries, Grant and Sherman, relentless in pursuit of victory. Meade, Thomas, Sheridan, Logan, steady hands on the field. Custer's daring, Burnside's burdens, Hooker's boldness, McClellan's hesitation, Stanton's iron will behind the lines, and Lincoln, the soul that held it all together. The Civil War was more than a clash of armies. It was a crucible that reshaped America, deciding not just its survival, but its identity. Their triumphs and failures still echo today, reminders that history is built by human hands. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey through the past. If you'd like to see more stories like this brought to life, consider supporting the channel, and don't forget to subscribe. Your presence keeps history alive.